Can you hear me okay on the computer audio, yeah?
Yeah, I think it sounds fine.
Okay, I'll turn that radio off. The only reason I have it on is because I've got really bad tinnitus, so I don't like to be sat in silence.
Oh, wow. That's rough, man.
Oh, man. Yeah, I've been having a bit of a rough time with it, actually.
Dude, I'm sorry to hear about that, man. That's I have it like it pretty minor at this point, but I'm always paranoid about it getting worse.
Yeah, well, I've had it for like over 20 years, and sorry, I'm trying to turn this off and it's not going. Oh, there we go. I had it for like over 20 years, and it was terrible when I first got it, but then it, as you know, you sort of habituate. And I did a gig in September in San Fran, and all was fine. I wear earplugs anyway, so there's never usually any way that it's going to get worse because I wear the earplugs. Anyway, I was ready to leave, and I said to the guy that was working there, "How do we get out?" And he said, "Oh, just go through that door and it takes you out." But he didn't tell me that it took me onto the stage, and I'd taken my earplugs out. And honestly, you could never replicate this in 1,000 years. As soon as I opened the door and stepped out, the CO2 cannon went off right next to me. Oh my
God.
And killed me. So I've sort of been since then. I've actually had to go to therapy and everything. Yeah, it's because it went so loud,
Jesus, man. When was that? How long ago now?
That was end of September, beginning of October. So.
Oh fuck! So still pretty recent.
Yeah. I had to cancel a load of gigs because of it, really, because it was just so loud. It has started. I don't know whether it's coming down or I'm habituating, but yeah.
Well, it's so scary, man, because, I always preach to younger people about wearing ear protection and all that, because in all of modern medical science, it's like one of the few things we still don't know how to fix. There's really
crazy. Yeah, absolutely.
That's why. Is there anything, just out of curiosity, if you don't mind talking about it, going to therapy or doctors, like, because I haven't necessarily kept up with treatments, like what is available to you to try to make this any better? What
they call CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, is what they recommend here. And it's really the only thing that you've got to maybe sort of lean on and help you. If there's anyone out there that is suffering with it, it's definitely a massive help. Obviously, there's nothing you can do about the ringing, but it can help you habituate quicker than just trying to like get through it on your own. I mean, I did that 25 years ago when I first got it. Looking back on that now, or trying to think back to that now, I don't know how I did that, because I wasn't able to do it this time around. I needed help. So, yeah.
Fuck, man. Just terrifying. I'm glad that it's at least slowly getting better. But yeah, especially for what you do, obviously, there's a lot of implications there. Yeah. Well, this is it. I think the takeaway from this is wear your earplugs, man, and don't take them out until you're outside. I've learned the hard way. I can't believe what a horrible thing, the CO2 going off right then. Unbelievable. Right, and like I said, if you tried to do that, you just wouldn't be able to time it as perfectly as I timed it. That's the double irony there, not to make light of your problem, but it's like so many times I feel like the CO2, they don't press it at the right time. It goes off like off. There you go. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. I think, honestly, I'm kind of over the CO2 in the club in general. I don't really think we need it at this point. I mean, even without having tinnitus and bad ears, it's loud as hell. It's louder than the music. It's going to cause somebody problems. Yeah. Yeah.
seems excessive, really, really, really excessive.
Yeah. As somebody, and I mean, maybe, we can kind of get into this whole discussion this way, but like, as somebody who's been in this game for a long time, before CO2 cannons were in clubs everywhere, which that's my era too. And for me, I'm like, well, it's louder than the music. Like, why would we want something that actually makes it so you can't hear the music?
I know, and the music's not quiet.
Right. So. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I do think it's a bit excessive,
man.
And you got sometimes, you got the CO2 cannons that point out the front of the DJ booth, and they're hitting the crowd at the front in the face. Dude. And a lot of them seem to love it, but guys, be careful. That's all I'm saying. Dude, you don't want what I've got.
I mean, I've 100% seen like a diagonal or a sideways CO2 cannon. I've seen it take out a drunk person, like just knock them down,
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you have a memory at all? This is totally open question, no wrong answer, but like, what's the first either concert or rave or any kind of performance you remember going to as a kid where you just couldn't believe how loud it was?
Oh, that's a great question. The thing is, back then, funny enough, I was talking to a friend about this literally 2 days ago. Back then, and I think this is just obviously when you're in your 20s, when you're younger, you don't really care about how loud it is in a sort of health regard. The louder it is, the better. And my friend was just saying to me, he said, remember when we used to like put our head in the speaker scoop like to get more bass in these big raves in the 90s? And I'm like, yeah, imagine doing that now. No way.
Oh, man.
So I don't think that I would have noticed anywhere the loudness of anywhere, because it was just like the louder the better back then.
But, it was just a bonus if it was super loud. I remember I grew up in Minnesota, and I was like a little metalhead kid before I got into raving. And I remember as a teenager I went and saw Slayer, and Slayer was like, it was louder than anything I could possibly imagine, like just orders of magnitude louder. And then it was kind of what you were talking about. Ever since then, I was like, oh, yeah, loud is good. Let's just find more of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I'll tell you what, I did go to recently it was just, what's it called in Chicago? Is it Spy Bar?
Oh,
that was loud.
Great club.
That was loud as hell.
Yeah,
great club. And the system was loud. But that was just after I'd had my tinnitus, CO2. And so I had my earplugs in, and I was trying to hide away from the volume rather than embrace it.
Of course. Well, that's another thing that I think people who don't have tinnitus don't realize, is that it's so easily like it's easier to set it off once you have it, Exactly. And this is the thing that, you're exactly right. People don't realize once you've got tinnitus, your ears are way more sensitive to stuff triggering it off or making it tinnitus louder, or even doing more damage. Yeah.
This is what the doctor said to me. Once you've got the tinnitus, it means your ears are damaged. I do have a bit of a dip in the 4K, which is apparently very common. And once you've got that, then you're more susceptible to getting more damage. Like, I've got a little dog, and if she sees a squirrel out the window, she does this high-pitched bark.
Oh, man.
I literally have to run away when she does it, because it just goes through my head like a knife,
That's rough.
Whereas everyone else is like, no, it wasn't that loud.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's really rough, man. Well, dude, we kind of just jumped into it, but, thank you for taking the time to do this. I know we were going to do it a couple weeks ago, and I think you were sick, and then I was out of town.
I got that dreaded flu that didn't help my tinnitus cause at all. But it seemed like everybody got it at the same. Well, everybody over here seemed to have it. Everybody I knew had it. I caught it, actually. Shout out to the people on the plane that gave me the flu. I was flying to Boston to do a Boston gig and then New York gig. And I was actually on standby, and I wasn't going to get on the flight, and then somebody didn't turn up. And so I ended up getting a seat. Right. And so I was so over the moon. I was like, thank you, God. And then just to make up for that, good luck, the the couple sat behind me was so visibly ill. Like, oh, they couldn't eat. Their eyes and nose were streaming. So visibly ill that I was surprised that they let them on the plane. And obviously, I called it off them. Obviously,
dude, that's what a run of bad luck. That's just another CO2 cannon in the face, man.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh God.
As they say, it's not all glamour in this game.
Yeah, man, 100%. I mean, okay, this might be a weird leap to make conversationally, but this is something I actually wrote down. I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's been in this game for a long time and has, an established track record over many years. Is it odd for you? Because I feel like the last few years, there's been like a renewed burst of, business and success for you. What does that feel like to have that this far into a career, having the perspective on the industry you do, knowing what you have seen and done? Like, is it odd or unexpected, or does it kind of feel like, oh no, I've been building to this?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm super grateful that it happened at all, because, lots of people can be doing this as well as we are and not really get any recognition. So sometimes the recognition is not directly correlated to how good you are or anything like that. I think sometimes you can just be lucky or a bit of both, So I think the main feeling I have about what's happened to me later on in my career is just gratitude. I'm just grateful it did, because it's made me be able to carry on instead of having to maybe stop and get a proper job and, pay the mortgage kind of thing. So I'm grateful in that respect. Was it expected? I don't think you can expect anything in life, but you can keep trying, you can, that was my attitude. I'm not going to stop. And I didn't, and it happened. So, I kind of, maybe, as I say, you make your own luck a little bit. You do need some luck from externally, but if you, I just dedicated myself to it and just didn't do anything but music. Excuse me. So, yeah, I felt like I kind of helped myself get there,
Of course. Yeah. It's like that old saying, the harder you work, the luckier you are kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. That's a great saying.
Yeah. I mean, if you look back at those, a couple of years ago when things did start to build up again, like now with the perspective that you have, do you think you were doing anything different? Was it just the right time for the music you were making?
Good question. I think a bit of both. I think what's happened in the last 8 to 10 years, I suppose, is the scene has got much bigger. House music's become much more popular than it was in the 90s and early 2000s. And so there's much more scope to be able to build a career in making house music, dance music, and DJing. So I think I got lucky with the timing there, where I was still doing it, and the scene, especially in America, the scene's just wow, it's exploding, and that's why us lot are always over there playing at your parties, because there's so many of them and they're good. Which is I would say the opposite of what's happening in the UK right now. All the clubs are closing down. There's hardly any clubs left. The scene, I feel, I could be wrong, but from my perspective, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller instead of bigger and bigger like it is over there in the US.
Which is so interesting to me because, I mean, again, I guess this is just our sort of opposite perspectives. But I mean, I've always, and I think a lot of American dance music lovers always look to the UK as kind of like, you know, not only to see what's next, because I think you guys have always been a little bit ahead of the ball for dance music, but also kind of as like the beating heart of that scene. There's so much romance in like, you know, an Essential Mix or going out to Fabric or whatever it was, all these things we've seen over the years. So, and you're not the first person from the UK recently who has told me they feel like the scene there is going through a tough time. So it's interesting to hear that.
Yeah. I think it's just because there's a lot of club closures, and you've still got those things that you mentioned, obviously, the stalwarts, as it were. But apart from that, there's not a big party scene, I would say, a club scene, because there isn't many clubs anymore. A lot of them have closed down, and obviously we're not as big as you guys in America, so you've got a lot more space, I suppose.
Yeah, we got a lot more space.
There's a lot more festivals. There's just a lot more of everything over there. So I think in turn that naturally makes the scene grow bigger. Yeah, and you mentioned like the production side in the UK always being like the forefront, the cutting edge or whatever and I still think that's probably true. It's just the going out scene, the right. Actual clubbing scene, I feel like is not the music itself and not the producers. I still think there's a lot of that happening here. And it's just the going out clubbing scene. I feel like condensed a lot,
Yeah. Which maybe that's just part of a natural life cycle of things. I mean, that's the way it always goes. Clubs open, clubs close. There's a scene has a big influential moment, and then it kind of goes away. And so I'm sure it'll come back. But it is interesting, just because in my mind it was sort of the UK scene was just kind of eternal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wish it was. I wish there was a few more things happening over here. Then I wouldn't have to get on so many planes.
Yeah, of course, man. Are you doing a lot of just like weekend commuting to the US these days?
Yeah, I was initially trying to join weekends up and stay there, but now, as we all know, the cost of living, it's just so expensive to have 5 days downtime anywhere in a hotel. You're killing any money you would make.
Yeah.
So now I just fly back and then come back. Yeah.
It makes sense. I know other people in different parts of Europe who have started doing that too. And it makes sense, especially depending on where you're going. I mean, even as an American, I mean, I'm in DC, so I'm on the East Coast. If I go play a gig in Seattle or LA, I'm flying 5.5, maybe 6 hours anyway. So it's not really that different.
It's not. No. I mean, that's pretty much exactly the same as what it is from London to New York. It's like 6.5 hours.
Yeah.
So it's not much different. New York is very expensive on the hotel front.
Oh,
it's like crazy.
It's so nuts. Yeah.
So if you've got like 5 days downtime to stay there, you're going to be spending your money.
Yeah.
Not earning it.
That's absolutely, either that or you're going to be, like staying at the hotel on the JFK tarmac,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I have looked into that, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, you and me both, man. I'm not above it.
Of course, no.
This does actually make me curious, like talking about the UK scene now. I want to know what it was like for you when you were a kid and just discovering dance music, just hearing dance music, going out to see it. Like, what part of the UK are you from originally?
London.
Okay.
So I live in London now. And back when I was a kid, I lived just outside London, but we always partied and raved in London. What was it like back then? I mean, I'm sort of trying to not be rose-tinted glasses on this one, because everyone, in my day, back then, it was this or is that.
Right.
But the thing is, I feel that there is a case for that here, because, we started raving when it first started, late 80s, early 90s is when it all first started. And so it was brand new. All the music was new. All the synthesizers were new. So, or not new, but never been used before in that context.
Sounds.
So
that's a great point. Like actual sounds you haven't heard before.
Never heard them before. Like all these sounds that we all know now as sort of classic rave noises, or, the Hoover, or the classic organs that we all love. You'd never heard that before. Nobody had, because the synths hadn't been made. And so I think you will never get sort of more brand new than that, The scene was new. The way we were raving in warehouses was new. The sounds in the records were new because the synthesizers was new. And it's not new anymore because we've all heard them sounds for 30 years now.
Yeah.
And even though people might twist them up a little bit, they're essentially not new anymore. So I do feel there's a case for saying that it was magical back then, because it was like, wow. I mean, even down to lasers, you know, no one had seen lasers in clubs before. And we were in this rave, 1990, and this big green laser came down, and maybe it was 91 actually, because the song that was playing at the time was a track called T99, Anastasia.
Oh yeah,
it's an old hardcore rave track that and then the green laser came down, and we were all like, "What is happening? This is crazy." And I just don't think you could experience that level of sort of brand newness again.
Yeah,
or man. I can't.
No, you're right. And I mean, people are trying to figure it out, I think, but you're right that most of the ideas have been done already. Now, if you go to a big arena-sized dance music show, you already know there's going to be 80 lasers there. Like, that's not a surprise, you know?
Yeah, and if there isn't, you're disappointed.
Right, yeah. right, exactly. Yeah, I think the only... You know, there's people like Eric Prydz or Chemical Brothers who are doing, you know, these crazy like hologram projection things.
That's new. That's the new concept.
But you got to have like $10 million to do that. You know, it's like
you're not turning up at a warehouse rave, and that's going to happen. Yeah,
exactly.
But again, so there's a new technology that we never had before, and it's showing itself in manifested in that way in the scene, and so that is something new, but. Apart from that, I would say nothing else really is.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. And it's okay, maybe this is an interesting angle on it too, because I think your records, especially your recent records, like you can hear the history in them. You reference, you know, older styles or sounds that we've been talking about. But I think you do it in a way, and this is something I like to talk about to producers on this show, is like, do you think about when you're referencing older sounds or styles, how to do it in a way that's not just sort of like replicating what had already happened? Because I think you're able to do it in a way that feels fresh, but the actual like technical part of achieving that is always interesting to me. I'm always curious about the secret of that.
I'm sort of, anyone who knows me well will know that I'm like fanatical about finding out which synth made which noise on all the classic records. I pretty much know them all now. So you can probably see a lot of synths behind me. So sure. I collect the ones that I think I want to use the noises out of. So I wouldn't sample something. I'd try and find out what it was made on and then get that synth and then maybe try and use it differently if possible.
That's a good way to think about it, actually, rather than, obviously rather than just sampling, but even rather than just hearing something old and being like, oh, I want this feeling. It's more kind of like you have a mental sample library, and just when you hear something, you're like, oh, this would sound good next to that. Yeah. And that's maybe a more holistic way to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
synthesizer nuts. That's what. If I'm not spending my money on hotels and flights, then I spend it on them.
Have you always been that way?
Say again?
No, I just said, have you always been that way?
Since I could afford it, yeah. I've always loved synths. I mean, I don't know if you can see the mini Moog there. That's showing up. I bought that when I had no money. I bought that in 1992. And I paid £800 for it. And there was one point where that had gone up to a value of about £12,000. So, in fact, the story, I have told this before, but I'll tell it again. So I'd done a load of reading, and back then there was no online. So I used to buy Sound on Sound magazine and read about all the synths that I dreamt about owning on the bus home from work kind of thing. And I'd convinced myself that I needed a mini Moog. And I looked in the back of Sound on Sound magazine in the reader's ads, and there was one in there, and it was £800. Back in 92, £800 was quite a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't really have £800, but I decided that I needed this synth. And so I phoned the guy up and I said, "Oh, can you play it down the phone?" And he played it down the phone. He said, "I'll get my son to do it." And he played it down the phone. I mean, what the point of that was, I don't know. On my part of it. Anyway, so I said, "Yeah, I love it. I'll have it." And so I put the phone down, and then I rang him back the next day because I sort of realised I didn't have £800. I had nearly £800, but I didn't. I said, "Look, I'm not going to buy it. It's a little bit much, and I don't think I can really afford it." This is what he said to me, and you would never get this now. He said to me, "Send me half the money, and I'll send you the synth down." And he lives in Newcastle, and I lived in London, so it was a long way. He said, "Send me half the money. I'll send you the synth. You can try it out, and if you love it, you can send me the other half." And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And I borrowed the other half off my mum. Thanks, Mum. But who would trust you to do that now?
That is crazy. Yeah, no way. Although that's a smart sales tactic. Maybe he could tell that you were the kind of person where once you got it.
He was a very smart man. Yeah. But, you don't know. If this is just on the phone, you don't know. There was no internet then. There's no emails. You can't check someone out on Facebook. Yeah. So I could have been anyone,
No, so, it's true. That's a crazy story. You're right. That would never happen today. There's no way. Well, I mean, so when you're going out,
like back then, kids.
Yeah, exactly. But so, in those days, like you're going out to these warehouses, you're hearing sounds you've never heard before. Was it, I guess my first question is like just being interested in dance music, going out to these events. Were you an outsider? Did you feel alone in these interests, or was this like a pretty popular thing at the time?
All my friends were into coming out and getting off their heads and dancing, but none of them were really interested in, how have you made that record or what. They loved it. Yeah. They loved the sound of it, but they weren't bothered about how the technicalities of it. That was just me. So, but I didn't mind because everyone was out with me and we were having a good time. So, yeah.
No, of course. But it sounds like pretty quickly you got interested in the behind the scenes parts of it.
I think I've always been like that. I've always been, when I was little, not little, but when I was at school for one of my projects, I made an amplifier, a power amplifier. I actually did build a laser as well.
Oh, wow.
A gas meter laser, as one of my projects. So I've always been into sort of fixing and building stuff. And I think that's probably, connected to me wanting to know how do you make that sound and what synth did that. And, I think it's all part of the same thing.
Of course. So yeah, was that sort of the entry point for you, was trying to figure out how songs were made and then it grew from there?
I think the entry point was, I blagged my sister into getting a keyboard for Christmas one year because I'd already asked for a bike and he didn't know what to ask for. So I said, "Get a keyboard, you'll love it." And obviously the keyboard ended up being mine.
Beautiful. Very smart. Very smart.
Thank you, Sid. She started my career off with that. And I actually taught myself to play on that. It was an old Casio keyboard. And I taught myself to play piano on that. And then after that, I remember saying to my mum that I wanted to go to lessons. And she was like, "Oh, my friend at church teaches piano." So I started lessons and that was kind of the start of it, really. Yeah.
Okay. And did those lessons continue? I mean, can you play piano pretty well at this point?
Yeah, the lessons did continue. I went on to study jazz piano and did jazz piano lessons, and then was in loads of bands for a good while in the 90s. Like jazz funk bands and covers bands, playing Shaka Khan and all those kind of classics. I bought myself a Fender Rhodes piano. I don't know if you know what that is, the old electric Fender Rhodes. Again, I found that in a secondhand shop. In fact, my friend who was the guitarist in the band, his name's Martin as well, and he rang me up one day, and he worked in a secondhand shop, secondhand music shop, and he rang me up one day and he's like, he's just got a Fender Rhodes in here and he only wants £199. Get it now. And so I jumped in my mum's car, drove up there and bought it. And I've still got that. That lives in my flat now.
Oh, wow.
But that's what I used to, and that thing, I don't know if you've ever seen one. It's like a massive coffin and weighs probably about the weight of two people. It's heavy and big. And I used to lump that round doing gigs.
Wow.
Yeah, for a good few years.
And was music always the thing? Like, did you have a thought in the back of your head that like, I'm going to do something in music, even if I don't know exactly what that looks like yet?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Always from day one. Yeah. Apart from when I was about 5, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and right. I had loads of pictures of planes on my wall, and then music slowly took over. Yeah.
It's harder to find someone to sell you a fighter pilot jet for half off,
Exactly. Yeah. Send me half the money and I'll send it down.
Less opportunity for that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Man, was there any history of music in your family, extended family?
Actually, yeah. So my granddad, he played piano. Actually, in World War II, they in his regiment, or whatever you call it. I think it was called a regiment. He was in the band for that regiment, and he played piano. He was pretty good, and my dad actually played trumpet, but I never heard him play trumpet, so I'm not sure how well he played trumpet.
Oh, interesting.
But he always reminds me of that. I used to play trumpet, I know, Dad. I still haven't heard it, though.
That's so funny. I mean, I used to play I played trumpet for like over a decade when I was a kid. Wow. And now I don't play anymore. So if I ever had a kid, it would be the same thing. That's what I would tell my kid.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I used to play trumpet,
It's one of those things I always say. I'm always thinking how I need to get back into it, and I never do. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything like that, but
I mean, I don't play as much as I used to when I was in the bands, obviously, because I'm either on a plane or playing a gig or sat in here trying to make house music. Right. So there's not a massive opportunity for me to play as much as possible. But I do, if I've got a bit of downtime, I've got a piano right here.
Oh, nice.
I do try and sit down and have a play. It's one of my favorite things to do, is just sit down and play the piano.
Of course, man. I mean, it's a really nice thought that you can at any time sort of uncomplicate your relationship with music, which I think at this point for any of us, it's gotten so complex and business is involved and all that kind of thing. But it's really nice to just the idea of just sit down, you and the keys, nothing more to it than that.
Yeah, exactly that. You can just sit down and play some music, good or bad, but it's exactly what you said. It just simplifies your whole relationship with music. You're not loading up plugins or turning the computer on it. You can just sit down and boom.
I think it's important, man. I think for anyone, even if it's not, just sitting down and playing an instrument, but you got to find some way to sort of reconnect to the simpler times at a certain point.
Yeah. One of my piano teachers said to me years and years ago, he said, everyone who makes music, I mean, he was talking about the people in the band, not necessarily producers, but I'm going to add this to everyone that makes music. He said, everyone that makes music, he meant in the band, should learn the piano, even if it's not their primary instrument, because it just helps with everything. It's the most visual instrument. It's also the easiest instrument to make a sound from, because all you got to do is press the key. There's no technique to that.
That's true.
Whereas all the other instruments, there's a technique. Your trumpet, you need a technique with your lips.
Yeah.
Guitar, you need a technique with the picking. You don't with the piano. So it's the easiest instrument to get a sound out of and to start on. And it's the most visual, because you can see all the notes laid out, as we all know what a keyboard looks like. It's the hardest to play properly, but it's the easiest to visualize and get a sound out of.
No, it's a good point. I think there's nothing to lose, and even if you don't find like a love for it, it's only going to help. There's no way.
It can only help. Exactly that. It can only help. Yeah, absolutely.
Man. Well, so while you were playing with the bands, was this happening in parallel with you DJing and producing at that time?
Oh yeah. I never stopped doing either of them. Yeah. But you could maybe say that it was a bit of a lull on the DJ front. And I had also stopped producing as much because I was always rehearsing and gigging. And actually at that time, I felt like I loved that more.
Right.
And so I just pursued that for a while. But as most gigging musicians will find that there's not much money in it. And there's 5 or 6 of you and you got to share that money. So, you're going out for a beer and a kebab and that's your lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, you soon realize maybe I can't make a living out of this,
Yeah. It's funny you say that, man. I was just thinking about this idea. I was like, I never really realized how grateful I should be that what I was into, being dance music, got pretty popular. Because I always forget that there's all these other music scenes that are just as valid and cool, but just never get that influx of attention.
That's right. Yeah, exactly that.
It's crazy.
And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier when you asked me about, what were my feelings about kind of making it in my later life. And that's why I'm saying I'm just grateful that the scene became big enough for me to actually earn a living out of it, basically. Because when it's a small scene, it means less people can earn a living out of it.
That's right. That's exactly. Yeah. There's something noble in it too. Like I've gotten back into like heavy metal music in the last couple of years, which I hadn't really paid attention to since I was a teenager. And it's really exciting. There's all this cool stuff. There's the bands are so talented and like just fascinating music. But then I'll go out every once in a while when I get a chance to see a band and, it's like the hot band of the year, the most hyped thing. And it's like they're playing for, 150 people on a Monday. There's just, it's so small. And in a way, it's inspiring because I'm like, oh, you guys don't care. Like you're just doing this for the love.
Exactly that. That's what I was going to say. That you have to be doing it for the love because you're not doing it for the money.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to imagine for you in your own career, there's probably been points where it's been that as well, right?
Oh, a lot of points. Yeah. I mean, to the point where, before it did really take off for me, I was, as I alluded to earlier, I was seriously going to have to make a decision whether I carry on with music or get a job and pay the mortgage, Yeah. Well, not even, I didn't have a mortgage. It was just pay the rent.
No, of course. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, because the scene has gotten so big, a lot of people don't realize how close to that point a lot of their favorite artists are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a lot easier now to make a living out of it than it was 10 years ago,
That's probably true.
Yeah. Just because it's bigger. And
of course.
It's more popular, so that makes it bigger and it means, more people can live off it.
Well, what was the first thing that really worked for you, or the first kind of check mark of success where you were like, oh, maybe I could really turn this into something?
I suppose. I mean, I had my first release in 1991. I think I was 17, and that was released on a relatively big label back then, Basement Records. It was a big label on the scene.
Right.
So straight away from then on, I thought, oh, well, here we go. I can make this work. But it got very hard. After that whole sort of rave hardcore period died, and then everyone sort of split off into their different subgenres. You got a lot of my producer friends carried on into the jungle scene. I did a little bit of that for a while. Some went on to garage, others went on to house. And that's when it was hard to make money out of it because you were trying to you were trying to get into a scene that was already tiny and very, very closed off.
Right.
And being that young as well, you hadn't been around long enough to know enough people to bring you in, kind of thing. So that period was tough. Yeah.
Man, it's funny talking about this is making me realize how these cycles always just repeat themselves where, a scene will have a moment, it'll bubble up and kind of everybody rises up. And then, you know, the tide ebbs a little bit and everybody has to find their own little island.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
It just happens over and over and over. It's so interesting, man.
I mean, the industry is very cyclical. Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, for you in those days, like early to mid 90s with like the rave and hardcore stuff, I love talking about because that's kind of what got me into dance music a little later. For me, you know, like Prodigy Experience is one of my all-time top albums. And,
exactly. Genius.
But I mean, I'm just dying to know for you, like actually being in it and being a part of it to some extent, like, how small of a scene did it feel like? Because to me, looking at it later on, it felt like such an enormous, like monumental thing. What did it feel like actually being in that scene at the time?
Oh, it felt massive to us as well. Yeah, it felt like the whole world was into this when maybe they weren't. It was just maybe a UK thing and other people were looking on, but it felt like this was it. There was nothing better than this. Yeah, it felt massive. It didn't feel small until maybe, as you say, it all started ebbing away a little bit, and you know, scenes change, and that's when it was hard to carry on making a living out of the scene.
Sure.
I think a lot of us to find our feet again.
And at that time for you, like putting out these records, you know, these are, and for anybody listening to give context, you know, we're talking about like vinyl releases, that sort of thing. Was that, what was the income? Was it mostly off of record sales? Was it playing gigs?
A record sales, 100%, because you weren't getting much for gigs. DJing back then, you know, I don't know, £150, something like that. That was normal. So, but there was good money to be earned off record sales back then.
Yeah.
And especially if you, which a lot of us did, after putting stuff out on labels, that you then put stuff out on your own. And, you know, nowadays people will create a label and put it on Beatport, and back then you didn't even need to create a label. You just pressed it on a white label.
Right.
You pressed, you know, if you pressed 3,000 on a white label, you could earn some good top money off that, you know, from the shops. And you could go around the shops. I've done this myself with the records in the back of your boot. And then you could go around all the record shops in London, because there was a ton of them and there isn't any now. And you could go in and say, how many of these do you want? And he'll play it. And if they like it, they might say, give me a box or give me 2 boxes. That's a box is 25, right?
Right.
So, you know, you've sold 50 records straight away, and all of that profit is yours. So all of us were doing that, and it was very lucrative. And that's why there were so many white labels out back then. Because you didn't need to set up a label. It wasn't necessary. Now when people say about a white label, it's normally because they've sampled something naughty,
right,
and they can't clear it, and so it's a white label.
Right.
But back then, I think it wasn't about that. It was just about, you didn't need to create a label. Just press it on white label and put it out. And you can earn some good money off it if it was a good record.
Right. And it
had to be a good record. You couldn't just put rubbish out, but yeah.
Well, and I think this is something I've talked about before on this podcast, but there's a scarcity element too with the old school white label stuff, where it was like a precious commodity, right?
Yeah.
And so
oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because it wasn't sort of owned by what you could perceive as a bigger entity, like, you know, a famous label like XL Records or anything. So it felt more finite being a white label, because you know that whoever pressed them up has only done a few thousand, and that's the end of it, you know? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. I mean, so this actually connects to something else I wanted to ask you, which was, when I knew we were coming to talk, of course, I was listening to a bunch of your catalog and just refreshing myself on all your work.
Yeah.
And one thing that kind of made me chuckle was, you know, if you go on your Spotify, it only goes back to about maybe 2012, 2013.
I haven't actually checked that. So, right, you probably know better than I do.
Yeah, unless I missed something, that was about the earliest I could
think
find.
You're probably right. Yeah, because probably because all the 90s stuff, they I don't know, maybe the labels are not around anymore to get it up.
Yeah, maybe it's labels that are gone. Maybe it's indies. Maybe it changed hands. Who knows?
Exactly. All sorts has gone on. Yeah.
But it just made me think about the idea of legacy in general. And I wanted to ask you, as someone who's been putting out records for a long time, is it something you think about? Is it what does it mean to you? Because I think we're so conditioned in the modern era to just be like, oh, like if it's not on, X platform, it doesn't exist to me if it's not on Spotify or whatever. Right. And it just made me think there's actually, all of the songs from all of the decades that aren't on these platforms, and kind of like, what is that? There's a
lot of good music.
What does it mean? What are the implications of that? I don't really know.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never really thought about that. I've never thought about the legacy being up online or not up online. Luckily, you got places like YouTube, and they, you can find that stuff on there.
That's
so
true.
If you really wanted to find out, you can. But you're right. A lot of that stuff isn't on these streaming platforms. I don't really know whose fault that is.
Yeah.
If it's anyone's fault, maybe just the labels don't exist anymore, which a lot of them don't, or even worse, the people that owns that stuff, as in the label owners, aren't alive anymore, and so they, they're not around to let it be put up, kind of thing. It could be a whole host of things.
Yeah, you're right. And maybe it's just, technology outpacing culture in some respects. Like now that we're talking about it, it makes me realize that probably when things went from records to tapes or tapes to CDs, probably the same thing happened. There was probably a bunch of stuff that got lost.
Got left behind, absolutely. Yeah.
I never thought about that, but it's kind of these cycles again, man. It's kind of all this. It just happens over.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. The whole scene is a cycle. Yeah, I always say that. In many respects, it's a cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some comfort in that too. It makes me want to ask you. You were talking about how much you love the synths and how much you've sort of researched the sounds that go into all of the songs that you love. How does your relationship with technology evolved over the years? Because to stay in this game a long time, I'm sure you've had to, again, these cycles, there's cycles in technology as well, learning new platforms, new software, staying current, even just in terms of like mixing and mastering, the quality has changed over the years.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the whole process has changed from making records back in the 90s. Probably behind me, I think you could probably see the mixing desk.
Oh yeah.
That is what we mixed our records on back then. We don't do that anymore. I've still got it because all my gear is plugged into it, but it doesn't get used to mix, as it was intended. That gets done in the computer. So I think there's a lot of people, or not a lot of people, there's some people that do like to stick with the old school methods, and that's up to them. But I think for me, I love technology and it just makes your life easier. So why not keep up with it, So there was a period in, I'm trying to think around when it was, maybe 2010, maybe 8, 9, 10, where I'd switched from using the analog gear to mix to all in the box. And that was a massive sort of, I basically had to learn again how to make records sound good. I knew how to do it on that, but I didn't know how to do it on the computer because I've never done it before. So, but that's held me in good stead, because now if I was still on there's no way I could get my record sounding as loud and as fat and as bassy as the people that are using computers, because we got new tools that we didn't have and you can't use on that. So I think if you want to stay current, it's important to keep up with the technology. And if it means you got to relearn what you were doing 10 years previous, then that's what you got to do.
Sure, yeah.
I find that kind of exciting. I'm a bit of a nerd like that. Like I said, I like to know how things work. So it intrigues me to, how do you use it? The only thing I haven't learned properly is Ableton, because I can't be bothered.
Wait, what do you use?
I use Logic, and I can use Ableton, but I don't know it inside out like I know Logic. And I just thought there's no point in me relearning a DAW, because they both do the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm an Ableton guy, but they're really, between Logic, Ableton, and like FL, I think it's pretty much all the same deal.
Yeah, it's just, whichever one you want to use, you're still up to date with technology. It's just different.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. They're all working on their software. They're all still releasing new versions. It's not like anyone's getting left behind there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Does that for you, is that excitement of like seeing what's next, what new ways there will be to make music? Do you think that's part of like what keeps you here and keeps you engaged with all of this?
It's definitely something that I'm into. I love it. Anything new comes out, I'll be like, oh, do I need to buy that? And I'll check it out. And yeah, I do like that aspect of moving forward and seeing what technology is bringing. I got a plug-in last year. I think it's called synth plants. Do you know it?
Yeah, synth plant. Yeah.
Synth plant. Wow. I haven't actually used it. I haven't used it in a record. I haven't used it to make anything with, but I was just amazed at the concept. You can put a sample in and it will re-synthesize that sound for you. I just had to buy it just because it could do that,
Oh, man. It's insane. Well, and they put out Synplant 2 now, which is even crazy.
Sorry, that's the one I've got.
Yeah. Synplant 2 is nuts.
Yeah. Crazy.
Totally nuts.
And like I say, I haven't used it. I've not even attempted to use it, but I just like what it does, so I bought it.
No, same here. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I guess you're right. I haven't used it in too many songs yet, but I think especially for days where maybe it's just a sound design day or just a fucking around day, that's when it's the best, because you can just get the wildest sounds out of it.
You can. Once you've put that little seed in, I think they call it, the seed, i.e. the sample, and you can go wildly left or right from that original sound.
It's crazy.
And so yeah, that is, for me, that sort of software is really like futuristic.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. And it's so much fun. And this is actually another question I like to ask people who have been doing it for a minute. Like for you these days, what is the most fun part of what you do? Like, what are you the most excited to do in your whole career at this point?
You mean making records?
It could be making records. It could be playing shows. It could be eating a nice dinner on tour. Like any part of it. Like what do you look forward to?
I think the most fun for me, it's always been the same thing. And that is the sound design, making sounds. And then the next most fun would be playing your record that you just made, to a crowd of people and then actually liking it.
Yeah.
That's a feeling that you can't beat.
Yeah, and that doesn't get old either.
No, that can't get old. So yeah, those two things are my favorite by far.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's good because both of those are renewable resources too. It's always
right.
A new
I never
experience.
thought of it like that, but yeah.
That's
until you get too old to be able to step onto the DJ booth.
I don't know, man. I think we're exploring the outer reaches of how old DJs can be at this point. Because I mean, know as many people as I do, where I'm like, oh, I don't think that guy's going to stop anytime soon.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. There's a few of the I call them the big boys that are still going and going well. So yeah,
absolutely.
Why not? No.
I mean, who's what's the guy's name? He's a UK guy, the famous BBC broadcaster who did a lot of like reggae, and white guy who like did a lot of reggae and other.
What's his name? I know exactly who you mean.
He's super old and he's still doing it, That's all.
David Rodigan,
yeah. You see him on stage and he looks like a grandpa, but he's still going crazy.
He does. That's right. Yeah. Well, I suppose they say you're lucky if you get to look like a grandpa, right? Because you've made it to that age. So
absolutely.
and if he's still got the opportunity to do it, then good on him.
Yeah, no,
I would do the same.
Yeah, 100%, man. Yeah, I don't think there has to be
if they still want to listen to you, then you're going to do it. Yeah.
There you go. That's probably the best way to know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, man, I wanted to ask you a little bit more specifically about some records of yours and about some remixes. And the remix thing in general, like, just because I want to make sure people listening to this know, I mean, over your career, you've remixed some huge names, insane things that I think could only have happened at that time in that era. People like Mariah Carey or Jamiroquai or like Basement Jaxx, who are personal heroes of mine, and all these crazy people. I mean, a million more. But I wanted to ask you in general, like, just to give context for people who might not know, like, how do those, back in the day, how did those remixes come about? How did you approach them? Because I think the remix game has changed a lot in the modern era. I don't know that it means exactly what it used to mean, for better or for worse. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but I don't know. Your reflections on like remixing huge artists in the 90s, it just, that's an era I think that doesn't exist anymore.
I think back in those days, the big labels, the big majors that owned those records, like the David Morales records and stuff like that, I think that's Sony, and the Jamiroquai, that is Sony. They were always actively looking for people to remix, and back then they were dishing out good money for remixes. I'd say it's much less common now. They've probably learned their lesson.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of bad remixes. But back then they were, the big labels were looking for remixes all the time. So they would generally come to you, or if they knew someone you knew, or your manager or whatever, that's how you'd get those sort of remixes. These days, I think it's a similar thing. They come to you if they want you, i.e. the Basement Jaxx, but it's probably less frequent than it was back then.
Sure. And yeah, I should be, because I realized I maybe sounded a little ignorant there. Obviously, of course, the bands are still getting remixed by people all the time. But I think maybe one of the differences is back then, remixing an artist was less available to your average producer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas now, of the second a song comes out, there's 8 million remixes of it. And back then, if you were asked to remix, a Mariah Carey song or whatever it was, probably yours was one of a couple remixes anyone would ever hear.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just technology. Again, technology has enabled anyone now to remix stuff, because you've got software that can make stems out of a record. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. That's some new technology that's pretty exciting. I mean, that is getting so good.
Yeah. And so that's why now, if something comes out, anyone can do a remix. You can just put it in one of those bits of software, stem it out, get the vocals out or whatever parts you want, and do your own version. So again, technology's enabled that to happen. Back then, you couldn't do that. It was impossible. So unless somebody from the label or the artist gave you the parts that were usually on a DAT tape or a reel-to-reel, you didn't have them. So that's why, it was a lot less than there is now.
Yeah. I mean, did it feel intimidating back in the day when you would get asked to, remix a massive artist like that, and you sort of knew that, this was really going to be the take that everybody was going to hear on that song?
I don't think you ever look at it like that as intimidating. It's excitement, oh wow, they've asked us, we're going to smash it,
Yeah.
So that maybe getting older, as you get older, you kind of analyze things more, but when you're younger, you don't, and you're just like, man, they've asked us, amazing. It's excitement rather than intimidation, I would say.
Isn't that funny? You just made me realize this. I don't know if you feel this way, but I'll speak for myself. It's funny to me that like as a producer and as an artist, like I was almost more confident when I was younger and didn't know anything.
Oh, yeah.
And now that I'm definitely much better than I used to be, I'm less confident, you know?
Yeah, same. Yeah. But I think it's because, like I just said, I think we do analyze more as we get older and maybe second guess all decisions, whereas when you're younger you don't, you just do it, and so that it breeds more confidence because you're not overthinking it, I guess, as much as we do when we're a bit older. Well, I definitely do.
Anyway. I do too. No, I do too, man. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's like all this podcast is me overthinking everything. Like going along your career, I mean, we're kind of just touching on a lot of different eras, but I know, of course, you put out music under a bunch of different aliases early on. You were doing these remixes. When did playing shows and touring start to be a bigger part of it for you?
Early 2010s, sort of maybe 2009, 8, 9 onwards, that kind of thing. I was playing shows for Defected back then, so that was sort of the start of it. And then after that, I got my first. I'd never had an agent up to that point because when I was doing the Defected shows, they were in effect the agent as well. And then after that, I got my first agent, DJ agent, and that's when it sort of kicked off with the shows properly. I was a bit naive, as in I didn't realize you needed an agent for a long time.
Right.
And then I got one and I was like, wow, this makes a difference.
Yeah. It's much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how did you like getting into that side of it? Because, I mean, if you've been, for the most part, you know, a studio rat, for lack of a better term, for decades, was it weird to all of a sudden be flying everywhere? And
I was always a DJ from the very start. I was DJing at school. So the DJing part wasn't alien, no, but maybe the flying around was a new, exciting thing in my life. Yeah.
But one that you liked, at least at the start?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't love the flying anymore just because I've got so many problems happening with my ears.
Yeah.
But back then they were fine. So yeah, it was, you know, you just get on a plane and go. You don't even think about it.
No, of course, man. Yeah.
I have to have this seat. I can't sit there. Yeah,
yeah, we know too much, man. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, and your record Head Noise that went gold there. That was what? When did you put that out? Like 2013?
That actually came out in 2015.
15, okay.
I believe. Yeah, I think that's right. 2015. I believe that came out in 15. Yeah.
I mean, what's the experience of that record going gold, which I have to imagine wasn't expected or the goal at the start of it? Like, what do you make of a record that kind of blows up like that?
That record's had a funny life, probably the weirdest life of all of my records, because it was, so the version you're talking about is the Head Noise and then in brackets Get Hype. And that's when we put the amazing Dope Earth Alien on it. I say we meaning me and the label. It was actually their idea, not mine. But that record, Head Noise, which is a reference to my tinnitus.
Okay. Because
that's another word for tinnitus, is head noise. I just made that as an instrumental, and it came out as an instrumental, and the people that knew about it really liked it, but it never really did that well. And then it was actually Mark Brown, the label owner of CR2. He's a great guy. He said, look, why don't we try and get a vocal on this? Because I think it's a really great record. Everyone loves it, but it could definitely do more than it's done. And I was like, for me, the record had come out. I wasn't actually that bothered.
Right.
When I make a record, I always say this to my manager, I don't want to make that record again. I never want to make a record that sounds like that record again. I'm not interested. I've done that. I want to do something else. So I'd moved on to the next record, and he was adamant, look, I think if we get a vocal on this, it will really help it live a proper life. And so I was like, okay, fine. And so we tried a few things, a few different vocals. They were okay. And I think we tried some classic rap vocal on it, and it was all right, but then they couldn't clear the publishing, and it was a nightmare. So, yeah. And then it was actually Mark's idea. He was like, look, Dope Earth Alien's amazing. Should we? And I was like, definitely. That's when my ears pricked up. And so Mark sent her the instrumental of Head Noise. I think she came back the next day with that dope lyric on it. And I was like, yeah, done. Chopped it up a little bit. It was done. And there you go. So really, I think a lot of the success of that record is down to Dope Earth Alien and Mark Brown at the label.
Sure, absolutely. But I feel like, I mean, to give you some credit too, like there's an energy to that record that I think it's just interesting to think about, like what goes into making a hit, because I think it's all of those things. It's talented people. It's happening at the right time. It's maybe a bit of luck as well, like we were saying at the start of this conversation. But it's just cool to see it happen, because I think, you know as well as I do, there's so many songs out there that could have or should have been hits. And
100%. Yeah.
And I feel like we're talking about one of those records that actually made it. And it's, I don't know, it's just a cool thing.
Made it on its second attempt. Yeah.
Well, you know, maybe that was the secret. I don't know.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I may have got the date of that wrong, 2015. I can't remember now when it first came out.
Oh, yeah, it's whatever. I don't think anyone's date checking us on that.
Got that date wrong.
But, you know, I will say the idea of like doing it a second time, that it's, again, cycles of ideas and culture. It's coming back again. I think now we're seeing in the age of like social media and going viral and all that. I've been telling people, because, you know, I think some younger artists will get frustrated if they post their song and it doesn't get much engagement or likes and kind of just disappears into the sea of content. I've been telling people, well, if that happens the first time, post it again 2 weeks later. Like, there's no try again, because I don't know, man. I think there is actually something in this age that we're in right now of like, maybe it just wasn't the right time. Like, throw it out there again.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's never been easier to, like you say, repost that up. You couldn't do that before all this social media. So use it. I mean, I'm guilty of not using it very well, social media.
I mean, you and me both, man. But
but if you're of a certain age and you're putting music out, that's definitely a massive help.
Well, let me ask you about, speaking of like the newer era, I had Noizu on this podcast a couple months ago, who I love. Yeah. And I know,
I love Jay.
He's a great guy. And the record that you did with him, Burnin', I love in general. Talk about the experience of working with him, who's from like a different generation of house music. Yeah.
You know what? Me and Jacob did the Fast Eddie record on Black Book back in 2020. And we'd never actually met. We just spoke online, and Jacob's just one of them people I just clicked with straight away. We got on, and that record happened really quickly. I think it was my idea to put Fast Eddie on it because I was a big fan of his. Yeah. I had all of his records from the late 80s. And so I got in touch with Fast Eddie, and he was like, yeah, man, let's do it. And so, you know, we got his blessing and he was on the record. And so that was the first thing me and Jacob Noizu did. And then after that, we became really good, actual proper friends. And, you know, I've stayed around his house a lot when I'm in LA. He's got a lovely place there. And we hadn't done something together since 2020. We were just like, we kept saying, we got to do something else. And then one day when I stayed at his house last year, I was playing a few shows and I stayed with him, and we just said, let's just start something now while we've got, a few hours here. And we did that. I bought a synth a few months before that, a new synth. Actually, you might know it if you like synths. Behringer did a remake of the old ARP 2600. It's like a big square.
Yeah.
Semi-modular, so you got to use patch cords. And I mean, to buy one of them, a real one, would be tens of thousands of pounds probably.
Yeah.
The Behringer one was £500. So I was like, I'm having that. And it's a beast. And so I bought it and made a load of sounds on it and sampled them all and put them in my software sampler. And then, so when I was at Jacobs, we had a couple of ideas. I had the idea of the vocal, and I was like, look, I've made some of these sounds on this synth. And then we just picked that one, which was the main lead.
Right.
And it just came together really easy. Jacob had some drums and it was like, boom, boom, boom. It all worked.
Yeah, man. I love him too. I mean, do you think you picked up anything from him, or he picked up anything from you in terms of like the different ways you work?
Always. I think anyone you work with, no matter which level they're on or which level you're on, you will always pick up something new, because everybody doesn't do stuff the same way.
Yeah.
And that's probably the main thing I love about working with people. And it's a shame these days, because a lot of the time when you do collabs, it's over the internet. And so you don't maybe get the insight that you would if you're together, And I've learned lots of little bits and bobs off Jacob, and I'm sure he has off me as well. I think when you make tunes with friends or collaborations, you're always like throwing ideas about how you do. Oh, so how did you do that? Oh yeah, well, I do it this way, and so you learn from each other in that way as well.
Yeah, no, that's the most fun part. You're absolutely right. Picking up the little tips and tricks and seeing the weird shit people do that you never would have thought of. Yeah. I mean, okay, so just one more track question, and then I'll start wrapping it up here. But the Where's Your Head At remix you did for Basement Jaxx. Yeah. When you're remixing like a massive iconic song in dance music like that, do you approach it any differently than you would any other remix?
Yeah, I was very, very torn and cautious on what I wanted to do with that record, because they asked me to do it, and it's one of my favorite records ever. And so I was like, wow, yes. And then immediately what starts going through your head is, you've got to do it justice. Number one, you can't make this worse.
Yeah.
But not only that, I think everybody thinks that, but the thing for me was, I didn't want it to be a remake. I didn't want it to be a 2020, whenever it came out, 2021 version of the original, because I feel like that's lazy and easy to do. And all you've got to really do is put some new drums behind it, and it's an up-to-date version. I didn't want to do it. For me, that's like a re-edit or a re-rub. It's not a remix. And so I said this to my manager, and he was like, oh, I said, I want to make it new, but still, have the feel of the old one in some way, but it needs to be I need to offer something new. That's why they've come to me. That's the way I internalized it. And so my manager was like, just use the original sound, down, down. And don't get me wrong, I love that bit. Obviously, everybody loves it. I love the riff and I love the noise. But I just thought, if I use that, then I can't put anything else new in there, because that's taking up all the space. And I messed around with a lot of noises. And then one day, I've got an old Korg synth up at the top. And I had that turned on, and I was making sounds on that. And because it's so temperamental, as I was playing the loop of the drums and the bass around on Logic, one of the notes kept hanging on the chord, kept triggering on its own and hanging. It was going, jam. And I was like, And it did it a couple of times, and I was like, oh, for fuck's sake, stop doing that. And then the next time it did it, I was like, actually, that sounds dope. And that is what the sound is, the main synth sound. That's how that came about. And I just knew it as soon as I'd paid attention to it with the right ears and thought, oh, actually, that does fit the big.
Yeah.
I knew that was the right sound for me. And I'm really happy with how that came out, because I feel like I brought something new to that record and hopefully didn't ruin it.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, I love that remix. And I love that story too, because it's like getting out of your own way in the studio, I think, and being open to, not being so locked into a plan where you miss the better idea. I think that's something any producer can fall prey to.
I mean, I spent a long time. I told you earlier that I like to find out what synth made which noises. I spent a long time researching how they made that original sound. Down, 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 because that's actually a sample.
Okay.
And so I found out what they sampled, and I found out what synth made the sample. And it turns out I had that synth. Actually, it was the ARP again.
Oh, wow.
And so I remade that sound to use it, because my manager was like, you've got to use their original sound. and obviously I ended up not using it because I thought the new one was just something new,
Yeah.
A different take on it.
But I love that journey just to make the older sound. I bet there's some part of that, in like a subconscious way informed the final product too. Yeah. And even if not, it was just a nice journey to go down. And that, that sort of thing excites me. I like to find out where sounds came from. And even if it's nothing else, that I just know how it was made now. And that's the end of that particular avenue. But I probably wasted a week on that. But hey, man, I wouldn't call it a waste if that keeps you excited and engaged. And, I think it gets harder and harder the longer you're in this game to be excited at all,
Oh, yeah.
And so if you still have something that sparks that for you, I think that's maybe the most valuable way to spend your time.
Yeah, you're right. And that is what sort of sparks it for me is trying to find out where sounds come from and then re-engineer them. And then I always find that takes you down a certain avenue anyway. You'll be like, well, this isn't actually right for what I want, but it's made me realize that I can do this, and
expands your world a little.
Yeah. And people always say, we'll talk about the hardware and do you need it? You don't need it. No, absolutely is the answer. You don't need it. But what it does enable is, I think, sometimes a lot more happy mistakes just from fiddling around on synths. Like I just said, that remix wouldn't have happened without the Korg hanging that note on its own, ask it to play. So I think just having the actual physical buttons and knobs to mess around with can bring more happy accidents.
Yeah.
Than maybe just the mouse clicks,
It's a good point, and a good note for any like younger producers listening too is like, you almost want to encourage the accidents to happen. You don't want to try to avoid the accidents.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's right.
Well, man, I mean, for you to kind of wrap all of this up in terms of what you're working on right now, or where your head is at, or what you're excited about, do you feel like you're on a journey with your sound right now? Do you feel like you've sort of solidified what you're doing right now? Is there anything coming up you're stoked about?
Yeah, there's lots coming up. Got some nice collabs as well. As far as journey or solidifying my sound, I feel like solidifying your sound might mean that you're going to get left behind. And I wouldn't want to rest on my laurels in that way, if that makes sense. I wouldn't want to think, right, this is my sound now, I'm staying here, I'm sticking to this. I'm always trying to literally learn every day. I always think there's a lot more I can learn, and there's a lot more levels I can get better to. So I'm always trying to be on that journey and not stand still, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. Yeah, I think that's kind of the best answer anyone could have for that question. Well, is there anything else we haven't talked about? Anything else that's on your mind or you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
No, not that I can think of. No.
Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed this, man. I hope you had a good time because this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, no, it's been fun. Yeah, it's nice reminiscing about some of those things, you know. Yeah, it's nice to talk about them because you don't often do. So I appreciate it.
No, anytime, man. And yeah, let's do it again sometime. This was great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, bro.
I'll let you get out of here, but yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you.
And you, buddy.
All right, man.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Peace, man.
Bye-bye.